The locket gleamed in the sunlight, a silent witness to a century of secrets. As Amelia fastened it around her neck, she couldn't have known it would unravel the lies of a powerful family, expose hidden bloodlines, and catapult a humble housemaid into a position that would shake the foundations of corporate America.
I never thought my life would take such a dramatic turn, all because of a simple necklace. But that's exactly what happened when I started working as a housemaid for one of the wealthiest men in town. My name's Amelia, and this is the story of how a piece of jewellery exposed the deep-rooted prejudices of a millionaire and changed both our lives forever. It was a crisp autumn morning when I first stepped onto the immaculate grounds of the Thompson estate. The leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the expansive lawn in hues of gold and crimson. As I walked up the winding driveway, my heart pounded in my chest. This job was my chance at a better life, a way to support my ageing grandmother and put myself through college. I couldn't afford to mess it up. The mansion loomed before me, a sprawling testament to wealth and power. Its pristine white columns and perfectly manicured hedges screamed old money and privilege. I smoothed down my simple black dress, suddenly feeling out of place in my sensible shoes and with my natural hair pulled back into a neat bun. The weight of my grandmother's necklace against my collarbone gave me comfort, a reminder of where I came from and why I was here. As I approached the grand entrance, the door swung open. A stern-faced woman in her 50s, whom I assumed was the head housekeeper, Mrs. Hawkins, greeted me with a curt nod. "You must be Amelia," she said, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "Come in. Mr. Thompson will want to meet you before you start." I followed Mrs. Hawkins through the foyer, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior, with crystal chandeliers, priceless artwork, and antique furniture that probably cost more than what I'd make in a lifetime. We passed by a room where a group of well-dressed people were having what looked like a business meeting. I caught a glimpse of a man at the head of the table, his presence commanding attention from everyone in the room. Mrs. Hawkins led me to a study and knocked on the heavy wooden door. A deep voice called out, "Enter!" and she ushered me inside before closing the door behind me. The study was a masculine space, with dark wood panelling and leather-bound books lining the walls. Behind an imposing desk sat Mr. Thompson himself. He was in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. His tailored suit probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. "So, you're the new housemaid," he said, his tone neither warm nor cold. "Amelia, is it?" "Yes, sir," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Amelia Johnson. Thank you for this opportunity." Mr. Thompson nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly as they fell on my necklace. It was a simple piece, a small golden locket on a delicate chain, but it clearly caught his attention. "That's an interesting necklace," he remarked, his voice taking on an odd tone. "Where did you get it?" I reached up to touch the locket instinctively. "It was my grandmother's, sir. She gave it to me when I turned 18. It's been in our family for generations." Something flickered in Mr. Thompson's eyes. Recognition, disbelief. But it was gone so quickly I thought I might have imagined it. He cleared his throat and continued. "I see. Well, Amelia, Mrs. Hawkins will show you your duties. I expect nothing but the best from my staff. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir." I nodded, eager to prove myself. "I'll do my very best." As I turned to leave, I could feel Mr. Thompson's eyes on me, or more specifically, on my necklace. Little did I know that this simple piece of jewellery would soon unravel a web of secrets and prejudices that had been carefully hidden for decades. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into my work, determined to excel at every task Mrs. Hawkins assigned me. From polishing silverware to dusting priceless artefacts, I approached each job with diligence and care. The other staff members were cordial but distant, and I often felt like an outsider in this world of wealth and privilege. Mr. Thompson was rarely around, always busy with meetings or travelling for business. But when he was home, I could feel his gaze following me, especially when I wore my necklace. There was something in his eyes that I couldn't quite place, a mix of curiosity, unease, and something that almost looked like guilt. One day, as I was cleaning the library, I overheard a heated conversation between Mr. Thompson and his son, James. They were in the study next door, their voices carrying through the thin walls. "Dad, you can't keep avoiding this," James was saying, his tone frustrated. "The company's image is at stake. We need to address the allegations of discriminatory hiring practices." Mr. Thompson's response was sharp. "We've always hired based on merit, James. I won't apologise for maintaining high standards." "But the numbers don't lie," James argued. "Our workforce doesn't reflect the diversity of our community. People are starting to notice, and it's not good for business." There was a long pause before Mr. Thompson spoke again, his voice low and dangerous. "I built this company from the ground up. I won't let it be destroyed by some misguided notion of political correctness. This discussion is over." I heard footsteps approaching and quickly busied myself with dusting a shelf. James stormed out of the study, barely noticing me as he passed. The encounter left me feeling uneasy, wondering what other prejudices might be lurking beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect world. As the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Mr. Thompson's interest in my necklace than mere curiosity. One afternoon, while I was arranging flowers in the sunroom, he approached me, his manner unusually hesitant. "Amelia," he said, startling me. "That necklace of yours, may I have a closer look at it?" Surprised by his request, I unclasped the necklace and handed it to him. Mr. Thompson examined it closely, his fingers tracing the intricate engravings on the locket. His face paled, and for a moment, I thought he might drop it. Where did you say your grandmother got this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's been in our family for generations, sir," I repeated. "My grandmother said it was passed down from her great-grandmother, who received it as a gift from the family she worked for back in the early 1900s. Mr. Thompson's eyes widened, and he quickly handed the necklace back to me. "I see," he said, his voice strained. "Thank you, Amelia. That will be all." As he hurried away, I couldn't help but feel that something significant had just happened. The necklace felt heavier around my neck, weighted with unspoken history and secrets. That night, as I was preparing to leave for the day, Mrs. Hawkins approached me with an unusual request. "Mr. Thompson would like to see you in his study before you go," she said, her expression unreadable. Nervous but curious, I made my way to the study. When I entered, I found Mr. Thompson standing by the window, staring out at the darkening sky. He turned to face me, and I was struck by how tired and conflicted he looked. "Amelia," he began, his voice heavy, "I owe you an explanation. That necklace you wear, it has a connection to my family, a connection I've spent years trying to forget." As Mr. Thompson began to speak, I felt a chill run down my spine. Little did I know that his next words would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family's history and my place in this world. Mr. Thompson's revelation hit me like a tidal wave, leaving me stunned and struggling to process his words. He gestured for me to sit down, and I sank into a leather armchair, my legs suddenly feeling weak. The study seemed to close in around us as he began to unravel a tale that would change everything. "That necklace," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "belonged to my great-grandmother. She gave it to her most trusted maid, a young woman named Sarah, back in 1912. Sarah was more than just a maid. She was a confidant, a friend even, despite the social norms of the time." I clutched the locket, feeling its weight anew. But how? Why would she give away a family heirloom? Mr. Thompson's eyes clouded with shame. "Because my great-grandfather found out about their friendship. He was a man of his time, Amelia, which is no excuse for what he did. He fired Sarah, accusing her of theft to cover up his own prejudices. My great-grandmother, in an act of defiance and apology, secretly gave Sarah the necklace before she left." The pieces started falling into place in my mind. My grandmother had always been vague about the necklace's origins, saying only that it came from a kind-hearted woman in a wealthy family. Could it be that Sarah was my great-great-grandmother? Mr. Thompson continued, his words coming faster now, as if a dam had broken. I grew up hearing whispers of this story, but it was always brushed aside, treated as a family shame best forgotten. I'm ashamed to admit that I internalized a lot of those old prejudices. I convinced myself that maintaining the status quo was the right thing to do. I sat there, absorbing his words, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Anger at the injustice done to Sarah, confusion about my own family history, and a strange sense of connection to this man who had seemed so distant and intimidating just hours ago. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Thompson ran a hand through his hair, looking more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. "Because seeing that necklace, knowing where it came from and what it represents, it's forced me to confront some hard truths about myself and my family's legacy. I've been living in denial, Amelia. The conversation you overheard with my son, he's right. I've been perpetuating the very prejudices that hurt Sarah all those years ago." I remembered the heated exchange I'd overheard, the accusations of discriminatory hiring practices. It all made sense now, fitting together like a painful puzzle. "What does this mean?" I asked, still trying to wrap my head around the implications. "For me, for my job here." Mr. Thompson shook his head. "Your job is safe, Amelia. In fact, I owe you far more than just employment. I owe you, and all those who have been affected by my blind adherence to outdated and harmful beliefs, a profound apology and a commitment to do better." As I left the study that night, my mind was reeling. I called my grandmother as soon as I got home, eager to uncover more of our family history. Her voice cracked with emotion as she confirmed what Mr. Thompson had told me. Sarah was indeed my great-great-grandmother, and the story of the necklace had been passed down through generations, a symbol of resilience and hope in the face of prejudice. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change at the Thompson estate. True to his word, Mr. Thompson began implementing sweeping reforms in his company's hiring practices. I watched as the staff gradually became more diverse, with people from all backgrounds being given opportunities they had previously been denied. But change, even positive change, is never easy. I overheard whispers and grumbles from some of the long-time employees who were resistant to the new policies. Some even directed their resentment towards me, seeing me as the catalyst for the upheaval of their comfortable status quo. One afternoon, as I was tidying up the conservatory, I overheard a conversation between two of the older maids. They were discussing the recent changes, their voices laced with disapproval. "It's all because of that new girl and her necklace," one of them said bitterly. "Mr. Thompson's lost his mind, letting guilt over something that happened 100 years ago change everything." "I heard she might even be related to him somehow," the other replied. "Bet she's just here to claim a piece of the family fortune." I felt my cheeks burn with anger and shame. Is that what people thought of me? That I was some kind of gold digger, using my family history to manipulate Mr. Thompson? I wanted to confront them, to defend myself, but I knew it would only make things worse. Instead, I threw myself into my work with renewed vigour, determined to prove my worth through my actions rather than my ancestry. I took on extra shifts, volunteered for the most challenging tasks, and went out of my way to be kind to even those who whispered behind my back. Mr. Thompson noticed my efforts. One day he called me into his office again. This time the atmosphere was different, less tense, more collaborative. "Amelia," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice, "I've been watching how you've handled yourself these past few weeks. Your grace under pressure is commendable." I thanked him, feeling a mix of pride and unease. "I just want to do my job well, sir." He nodded, then surprised me with his next words. "I have a proposition for you. I'm starting a new initiative within the company, focused on diversity and inclusion. I'd like you to be part of it." My eyes widened in shock. "Me? But I'm just a housemaid." Mr. Thompson smiled, a genuine warmth in his expression that I'd never seen before. "You're much more than that, Amelia. You're intelligent, hard-working, and you have a unique perspective that could be invaluable to this project. Of course, it would mean a significant change in your role here and a pay raise to match." I felt overwhelmed by the offer, my mind racing with possibilities. This could be my chance to make a real difference, to help create the kind of change that Sarah could only have dreamed of. But it would also mean stepping into a world I knew nothing about, facing challenges I couldn't even imagine. "Can I have some time to think about it?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Of course," Mr. Thompson replied. "Take all the time you need. But know this, Amelia. I believe you have the potential to do great things. Don't let fear hold you back." As I left his office, my head spinning with this unexpected turn of events, I ran into James, Mr. Thompson's son. He gave me a warm smile, so different from the distant nods I was used to receiving. "I heard about my father's offer," he said. "I hope you'll consider it. We need voices like yours in the company." I thanked him, feeling a surge of confidence at his words. Maybe I could do this after all. That night, as I sat in my small apartment, turning the locket over in my hands, I thought about Sarah. I imagined her leaving the Thompson estate all those years ago, this very necklace tucked safely away, carrying with it the weight of injustice, but also the promise of a better future. I thought about my grandmother, who had worked as a housekeeper her whole life, always dreaming of more for her children and grandchildren. I realised then that this necklace wasn't just a piece of jewellery or a family heirloom. It was a bridge between past and present, a tangible reminder of how far we've come and how far we still have to go. By accepting Mr. Thompson's offer, I had the chance to honour Sarah's memory and my grandmother's dreams in a way I never thought possible. The next morning, I marched into Mr. Thompson's office with my head held high. "I accept your offer," I said, my voice steady and confident. Mr. Thompson's face broke into a genuine smile. "I'm glad to hear it, Amelia. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but I believe together we can make real change." As I shook his hand, sealing this new chapter in both our lives, I felt the weight of the locket against my chest. It no longer felt like a burden of history, but a source of strength and inspiration. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but I was ready to face them all. For the first time since I'd started working at the Thompson estate, I felt like I truly belonged. Not as a housemaid or an outsider, but as someone with the power to shape the future. As I left Mr. Thompson's office that day, I silently thanked Sarah and all the women who came before me, whose struggles and sacrifices had paved the way for this moment. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew about myself, about the Thompsons, and about the complex web of history and prejudice that connected us all. The necklace that had once exposed a painful past was now opening doors to a future full of possibility, and more surprises than I could have ever imagined. The transition from housemaid to a key player in Thompson Enterprises' diversity initiative was like stepping into another world. Gone were the days of polishing silverware and dusting antiques. Instead, I found myself in boardrooms, surrounded by executives in tailored suits, all eyes on me as I presented our plans for a more inclusive workplace. At first, the weight of responsibility was almost crushing. I'd lie awake at night, my grandmother's locket clutched in my hand, wondering if I was in over my head. But with each small victory, a successful recruitment drive in underserved communities, a mentorship program for minority employees, I felt my confidence grow. Mr. Thompson, true to his word, became my staunchest supporter. He'd often seek my opinion on company matters, valuing my perspective as someone who had seen both sides of the coin. But not everyone was as welcoming of the changes we were implementing. One crisp autumn morning, about 6 months into my new role, I arrived at the office to find an anonymous note on my desk. The words, cut out from magazines and pasted haphazardly, sent a chill down my spine. "You don't belong here. Go back where you came from." I crumpled the note in my fist, anger and hurt warring inside me. Part of me wanted to run to Mr. Thompson to show him this proof that our work was far from done. But another part, the part that remembered the whispers and sidelong glances from my days as a maid, knew that this was a battle I had to fight on my own. Instead of cowering, I channeled my emotions into my work. I threw myself into researching the company's history, determined to understand the roots of the prejudices we were fighting against. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I stumbled upon something that would change everything. Buried in the company archives was a series of letters between Mr. Thompson's great-grandfather and a business partner. The language was coded, but the meaning was clear. They had systematically worked to prevent people of colour from advancing within the company, all while publicly maintaining a facade of fairness. My hands shook as I read the damning evidence. This wasn't just about one family's prejudices, it was about a systemic problem that had shaped the company for generations. I knew I had to bring this to Mr. Thompson's attention, but I dreaded his reaction. Would he try to bury it again, protecting his family's legacy at the expense of real change? The next morning, I steeled myself and knocked on Mr. Thompson's office door. He greeted me with a warm smile that faltered when he saw my serious expression. I placed the letters on his desk without a word. As he read, I watched the colour drain from his face. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with a mix of shock, shame, and something else: determination. "Amelia," he said, his voice hoarse. "I had no idea. This changes everything." I nodded, relief washing over me. "It does. But sir, it also gives us an opportunity. We can use this as a catalyst for real, lasting change." Over the next few weeks, Mr. Thompson and I worked tirelessly to craft a plan. We decided to go public with the company's history, owning up to past mistakes and outlining concrete steps for rectification. It was a risky move. Stock prices would likely take a hit, and we'd be opening ourselves up to intense scrutiny and potential lawsuits. The day of the press conference arrived, and I stood beside Mr. Thompson as he addressed a room full of journalists. My heart pounded as he spoke, laying bare the ugly truth of the company's past and our plans for the future. When he finished, the room erupted in a cacophony of questions and camera flashes. In the chaos that followed, I felt a hand on my arm. It was James, Mr. Thompson's son, his face a mix of pride and concern. "You've started a revolution, Amelia," he said, his voice barely audible above the din. "But revolutions have casualties. Be careful." His words proved prophetic. The fallout from our revelation was immediate and intense. Stock prices plummeted, long-time clients pulled their contracts, and a flood of lawsuits hit the company. The board of directors called for an emergency meeting, and I found myself in the crosshairs. "This is your fault," one of the board members spat, his face red with anger. "You've destroyed everything we've built." I stood my ground, my hand instinctively reaching for my locket. "No," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "We're rebuilding on a stronger foundation, one of truth and equality." Mr. Thompson backed me up, his voice ringing with authority as he reminded the board that this was not just the right thing to do morally, but also the smart move for the company's long-term success. Still, I could see the doubt in some of their eyes. We had a long fight ahead of us. As the weeks turned into months, we weathered storm after storm. There were days when I questioned everything, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. But then I'd receive an email from a young employee of colour, thanking us for creating an environment where they finally felt valued. Or I'd see a news report about other companies following our lead, inspired by our transparency and commitment to change. One particularly tough day, after a grueling meeting with investors, I found myself in the company's small museum. It was filled with artefacts from the Thompson family's history, old photographs, vintage products, awards. As I wandered through the exhibits, my eyes fell on a familiar sight, a locket, identical to the one around my neck, displayed in a glass case. The plaque beneath it read, "Thompson Family Heirloom circa 1900, believed lost until recently rediscovered." My breath caught in my throat. I knew, without a doubt, that this was the twin to my grandmother's locket. But how had it found its way back to the Thompsons? As I stood there, lost in thought, I felt a presence behind me. It was Mr. Thompson, his face etched with fatigue but his eyes kind. "I see you found our little secret," he said softly. I turned to him, questions burning on my tongue. He held up a hand, silencing me before I could speak. "There's something I need to show you, Amelia. something I should have shared a long time ago. He led me to his office, where he unlocked a hidden safe behind a painting. From it, he withdrew a stack of yellowed papers. "These are letters," he explained, "between my great-grandmother and Sarah, your great-great-grandmother. They kept in touch in secret for years after Sarah left our employ." With trembling hands, I took the letters. As I read through them, tears welled in my eyes. They spoke of a deep friendship, of shared hopes and dreams for a more equal future. In the last letter, dated just before my great-great-grandmother's death, she spoke of passing down her locket to her daughter, hoping that one day it might find its way back to the Thompsons as a symbol of reconciliation. "When I saw your locket that first day," Mr. Thompson said, his voice thick with emotion, "I knew it was time to face our past. But I was a coward, Amelia. I let my fear of change, of upsetting the status quo, hold me back. It took your courage, your unwavering commitment to justice, to push me to do the right thing." I looked up at him, seeing him in a new light. "Why didn't you tell me about these letters before?" He sighed heavily. "I was ashamed of my family's past, ashamed of my own inaction. But seeing you fight so hard for what's right, it's inspired me to be better, to do better." As I stood there, the weight of history heavy in my hands, I realised that our journey was far from over. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles and setbacks. But for the first time, I felt truly hopeful about the future. Mr. Thompson and I spent hours poring over the letters, piecing together the untold story of Sarah and his great-grandmother. It was a tale of unlikely friendship, of small acts of rebellion against the prejudices of their time. With each revelation, I felt a deeper connection to my own history and a renewed sense of purpose. As dawn broke, casting a soft glow through the office windows, Mr. Thompson looked at me with determination in his eyes. "Amelia," he said, "I think it's time we tell the full story. Not just of the company's past mistakes, but of the friendship that transcended those prejudices. It's a story of hope, of the power of human connection to overcome even the deepest divides." I nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation. "But how? We've already faced so much backlash." He smiled, a glimmer of his old confidence returning. "We'll do it together. Your voice, your family's story, combined with our resources and platform. We can turn this into a force for positive change, not just within our company, but in society at large." As we began to plan our next steps, I felt the weight of my locket against my chest. It was no longer just a family heirloom or a symbol of past injustices. It had become a beacon of hope, a tangible reminder that change is possible, even in the face of deeply entrenched prejudices. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of an even more extraordinary chapter in our intertwined histories. The revelations that would follow would shake the foundations of everything we thought we knew about our families, our company, and ourselves. The decision to share the full story of Sarah and Mr. Thompson's great-grandmother set in motion a series of events that would change our lives forever. We spent weeks preparing, gathering all the evidence and crafting a narrative that would not only reveal the truth, but also inspire change. The day of our big announcement arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable. We had chosen to hold a press conference at the company headquarters, inviting journalists, employees, and even some of our harshest critics. As I stood beside Mr. Thompson on the stage, my heart pounding, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a nearby window. The woman staring back at me looked nothing like the timid housemaid who had first walked through these doors. She was confident, determined, and ready to face whatever came next. Mr. Thompson began by recounting the company's troubled history, much as he had done in our first press conference. But this time he went further, revealing the story of Sarah and his great-grandmother. As he spoke, I could see the shock and disbelief rippling through the audience. When he finished, he turned to me, signalling that it was my turn to speak. I stepped up to the microphone, my hand instinctively reaching for my locket. "My name is Amelia Johnson," I began, my voice steady despite my nerves. "And I am the great-great-granddaughter of Sarah, the woman you just heard about." A collective gasp went through the room. I went on to share my family's side of the story, how the locket had been passed down through generations, a symbol of resilience and hope. As I spoke, I could see tears in the eyes of some audience members, while others nodded in understanding. Just as I was wrapping up my speech, a commotion at the back of the room caught my attention. A woman was pushing her way through the crowd, her face a mask of determination. As she got closer, I felt the blood drain from my face. It was Mrs. Hawkins, the head housekeeper who had first greeted me on my first day at the Thompson estate. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent room. "But there's something you all need to know." Mr. Thompson started to intervene, but Mrs. Hawkins held up her hand, silencing him. "I've worked for the Thompson family for over 40 years, she continued, "and I've been keeping a secret that I can no longer bear." With trembling hands, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is a letter from Mr. Thompson's grandmother, written on her deathbed. She entrusted it to me with instructions to reveal its contents only when the time was right. I believe that time is now." The room was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop as Mrs. Hawkins unfolded the letter and began to read. The words that followed sent shockwaves through everyone present. The letter revealed that Sarah, my great-great-grandmother, and Mr. Thompson's great-grandmother had been more than just friends. They had been half-sisters, sharing the same father. The lockets had been given to them by their father, a secret token of his love for both his daughters, one born to his wife, the other to a woman he had had an affair with. As Mrs. Hawkins finished reading, I felt as if the ground had disappeared from beneath my feet. I looked at Mr. Thompson, seeing my own shock and disbelief mirrored in his face. We weren't just connected by a shared history of employer and employee, we were family. The revelation threw everything into chaos. Journalists were shouting questions, cameras were flashing, and I could see the board members huddled in a corner, their faces pale with shock. In the midst of it all, I felt a hand on my arm. It was James, Mr. Thompson's son. No, my cousin. "We need to get you and my father out of here," he said urgently. "This is too much to process with all these people around." In a daze, I allowed James to lead me and Mr. Thompson to a private room. As soon as the door closed behind us, shutting out the noise and confusion, Mr. Thompson sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "All these years," he murmured. "All these years, and I never knew." I stood there, unsure of what to say or do. The locket around my neck suddenly felt heavier than ever, laden with a history far more complex than I had ever imagined. James was the first to break the silence. "This changes everything," he said, his voice a mix of awe and concern. "The company, our family, nothing will ever be the same." He was right. In the days and weeks that followed, our lives were turned upside down. The media frenzy was intense, with reporters digging into every aspect of our newly discovered family connection. Old photos were unearthed, showing Sarah and Mr. Thompson's great-grandmother together, their resemblance suddenly obvious now that we knew to look for it. The company was in turmoil. Some board members called for Mr. Thompson's resignation, arguing that the scandal was too much for the company to bear. Others saw it as an opportunity, a chance to rebrand the company as a symbol of reconciliation and progress. Through it all, Mr. Thompson and I found ourselves growing closer, bonded by our shared shock and the weight of our family's history. We spent hours poring over old documents, piecing together the full story of our ancestors. It was a tale of love, betrayal, and societal pressures that had torn a family apart. One evening, as we sat in Mr. Thompson's study, surrounded by old photographs and letters, he turned to me with tears in his eyes. "Amelia," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "I want you to know that I'm proud to call you family. The strength and dignity you've shown throughout all of this. It's remarkable." His words touched me deeply, healing a part of me that I hadn't even realised was wounded. For so long I had felt like an outsider, someone who didn't quite belong in the world of wealth and privilege I had entered. Now I understood that I had always belonged here, in a way none of us could have imagined. As the dust began to settle, We faced the daunting task of charting a path forward. The company's future hung in the balance, and with it, the livelihoods of thousands of employees. Mr. Thompson called a board meeting, and to my surprise, he asked me to attend. As we entered the boardroom, I could feel the tension in the air. The board members eyed me warily, clearly unsure of my place in this new family dynamic. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat and began to speak. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice steady and determined, "we have a choice to make. We can try to bury this story, to pretend that nothing has changed. Or we can embrace it, use it as a catalyst for real, meaningful change in our company and in society at large." He paused, looking each board member in the eye before continuing. "I propose that we establish a foundation in Sarah's name, dedicated to promoting diversity and reconciliation in the business world, and I want Amelia to lead it." The room erupted in a mix of protests and questions. I sat there, stunned by the proposal. Me, lead a foundation. It seemed impossible, and yet, as the arguments flew back and forth across the table, I found my voice. "Gentlemen," I said, standing up. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. "I know this is unconventional. I know it's risky. But think about the message it would send. A company acknowledging its past mistakes and actively working to right those wrongs. It's not just the right thing to do, it's good business." To my surprise, James stood up beside me. "I agree," he said firmly. "This is our chance to be on the right side of history, to show that change is possible, even in the most entrenched systems." One by one, the board members began to nod. It wouldn't be easy, they warned. We'd face skepticism, criticism, maybe even boycotts. But in the end, they agreed it was worth the risk. As we left the boardroom, Mr. Thompson pulled me aside. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. I touched my locket, thinking of Sarah and all the women who had come before me. "I am," I said, feeling a sense of purpose settle over me. This is what I was meant to do. In the months that followed, we worked tirelessly to bring the Sarah Johnson Foundation to life. We faced challenges at every turn, skeptical investors, negative press, even threats from those who opposed our message of change and reconciliation. But we persevered, driven by the knowledge that we were part of something bigger than ourselves. The Foundation's launch was a moment I'll never forget. As I stood on stage, preparing to give my speech, I looked out at the sea of faces before me. There were employees from every level of the company, community leaders, and even some of our former critics who had come around to support our cause. As I began to speak, sharing our vision for a more inclusive and equitable business world, I felt the weight of history on my shoulders. But it no longer felt like a burden. Instead, it was a source of strength, propelling me forward. "We can't change the past," I concluded, my voice ringing out clear and strong. "But we can learn from it. We can use it to build a better future. A future where no one is held back because of the colour of their skin or the circumstances of their birth. A future where every person has the opportunity to reach their full potential." As the applause washed over me, I touched my locket one last time. In that moment, I felt connected to all the women who had worn it before me. Sarah, my grandmother, my mother. Their struggles, their hopes, their dreams, all had led to this moment. The road ahead would not be easy. We still had much work to do, many hearts and minds to change. But as I looked at Mr. Thompson, my employer turned family, and at James, who had become not just a cousin but a true friend and ally, I knew we were up for the challenge. Our story, a tale of prejudice overcome, of family lost and found, of a company transformed, was just beginning. And I, Amelia Johnson, once a humble housemaid, now stood ready to write its next chapter. As the Sarah Johnson Foundation took its first steps into the world, I found myself navigating a landscape I never imagined I'd be part of. The days of polishing silverware and dusting antiques seemed like a lifetime ago. Now my days were filled with strategy meetings, public speaking engagements, and endless cups of coffee as we worked to turn our vision into reality. The Foundation's first major initiative was a scholarship program for underprivileged students interested in business and entrepreneurship. We named it the Two Lockets Scholarship, a nod to the jewellery that had brought our family's story to light. As we sifted through applications, I was struck by the talent and determination of these young people, many of whom reminded me of myself not so long ago. One afternoon, as I was reviewing applications in my new office, a far cry from the tiny desk I once occupied as a maid, James knocked on my door. His face was serious, and I could tell something was weighing on his mind. "Amelia," he said, taking a seat across from me, "we need to talk about the Thompson Family Trust." I felt a knot form in my stomach. The trust, which controlled a significant portion of the company's shares, had been a point of contention since our family connection was revealed. Some members of the extended Thompson family were pushing to have me excluded, arguing that I wasn't a real Thompson. James must have seen the worry on my face because he quickly continued, "Don't worry, it's good news. Dad and I have been working with the lawyers, and we found a way to amend the trust. We want to include you and your family as beneficiaries." I sat back, stunned. This wasn't just about money, it was about acceptance, about truly becoming part of the family. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Won't the others object?" James smiled, a determined glint in his eye. "Let them try. We have the majority vote, and more importantly, we have the moral high ground. It's time to right the wrongs of the past, Amelia. All of them." As news of the trust amendment spread, it sparked a fresh wave of media attention. Some praised it as a bold move towards reconciliation, while others criticised it as a publicity stunt. Through it all, I tried to stay focused on our mission, on the lives we were working to change. But the controversy took its toll. Late one night, as I was leaving the office, I found my car vandalised, racial slurs spray-painted across the hood. It was a stark reminder that not everyone was ready for the changes we were trying to make. Shaken, I called Mr. Thompson, Uncle Robert, as I'd started to call him. His voice was filled with concern and anger when I told him what had happened. He insisted on sending a security detail to escort me home, but as I hung up the phone, I felt a renewed sense of determination. If there were still people out there who would stoop to such tactics, it only proved how necessary our work was. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find the entire staff gathered in the lobby. As I walked in, they burst into applause. Uncle Robert stepped forward, addressing the crowd. "What happened last night was a cowardly act," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "But we will not be intimidated, we will not back down. Amelia is family, and an attack on her is an attack on all of us." His words moved me deeply, and as I looked around at the faces of my colleagues, many of whom I'd once served as a maid, I saw nothing but support and solidarity. It was a powerful reminder of how far we'd come and how much further we could go if we stood together. In the weeks that followed, we doubled down on our efforts. We launched a series of town hall meetings, inviting community members to share their experiences and ideas for promoting equality and inclusion. It wasn't always easy. Some meetings got heated, with long-held grievances bubbling to the surface. But slowly, we began to see progress. One of our most successful initiatives was a mentorship program that paired executives from Thompson Enterprises with young entrepreneurs from underserved communities. I took a personal interest in this program, remembering how much I would have benefited from such guidance when I was starting out. It was through this program that I met Zoe, a brilliant young woman with a passion for sustainable technology. She reminded me so much of myself, driven, a bit unsure, but determined to make her mark on the world. As I worked with her, helping her refine her business plan and make connections in the industry, I felt like I was paying forward all the support and opportunities I'd been given. One day, as Zoe and I were wrapping up a mentoring session, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Ms. Johnson," she said, her eyes serious, "do you ever feel like you don't belong? Like you're an imposter in this world?" I sat back, considering her question carefully. It was something I'd struggled with myself, especially in the early days of my new role. "Honestly, Zoe," I replied, "sometimes I do. But then I remember something my grandmother used to say. She'd tell me, "Amelia, you belong wherever you decide to plant your feet. It's not about fitting into someone else's world, it's about creating your own space, your own path." Zoe nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I like that," she said. Creating your own space. As she left my office, I found myself reflecting on my own journey. From housemaid to foundation leader, from outsider to family member, it had been a whirlwind of change. But through it all, I'd stayed true to myself, to the values my grandmother had instilled in me. The following month, we held a gala to celebrate the first anniversary of the Sarah Johnson Foundation. As I stood on the stage, looking out at the sea of faces, board members, scholarship recipients, mentees like Zoe, I felt a surge of pride and hope. "A year ago," I began, my voice steady and clear, "I stood before you as Amelia Johnson, former housemaid turned unlikely heiress. Today, I stand before you simply as Amelia, a woman who has learned that family is not just about blood, but about shared values and a commitment to making the world a better place." I went on to share some of our successes, the scholarships we'd awarded, the businesses we'd helped launch, the lives we'd touched. But I also acknowledged the challenges we still faced, the work that still needed to be done. "Our journey is far from over," I concluded, touching the locket that still hung around my neck. "But as long as we remember our past, embrace our present, and work together for a better future, there's nothing we can't achieve." As the applause washed over me, I caught Uncle Robert's eye in the audience. He gave me a nod of approval, his eyes shining with pride. Next to him, James was beaming, and I could see tears in his eyes. After the gala, as we were saying our goodbyes, a young woman approached me. She introduced herself as a journalist and asked if she could have a word. Intrigued, I agreed. "Ms. Johnson," she began, "your story has inspired so many people. A housemaid who discovered she was part of one of the wealthiest families in the country, who's now leading a major foundation. It's like a fairy tale, but I have to ask, do you ever miss your old life?" I considered her question carefully. Did I miss my old life? The simplicity of it, the clear-cut responsibilities? Sometimes, yes. But then I thought of all we'd accomplished, all the lives we'd changed. "I don't miss my old life," I replied honestly, "but I'm grateful for it. Every experience, every struggle has shaped me into who I am today, and who I am is someone who can make a difference." The journalist nodded, scribbling in her notebook. "One last question," she said. "What's next for Amelia Johnson and the Sarah Johnson Foundation?" I smiled, thinking of all the plans we had in the works. The expansion of our scholarship programme, the launch of a new initiative to promote diversity in corporate boardrooms, the partnerships we were forming with other organisations. "What's next?" I repeated. "We're just getting started. The story of Sarah and her locket, of two families separated by prejudice and reunited by chance. It's not just our story. It's a reminder that change is possible, that it's never too late to right the wrongs of the past. And we're going to keep telling that story, keep fighting for equality and justice, for as long as it takes." As I walked away from the interview, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be more challenges, more setbacks, more moments of doubt. But I was ready for them. I had my family behind me, both my birth family and my newfound Thompson relatives. I had the memory of Sarah and all the strong women who had come before me. And I had my locket, a constant reminder of where I'd come from and where I was going. From housemaid to heiress to changemaker, it had been an incredible journey. But as I looked to the future, I knew the most exciting chapters were yet to be written. And I, Amelia Johnson, was ready to write them. As I left the gala that night, stepping out into the cool evening air, I took a moment to look up at the stars. I thought of Sarah and Mr. Thompson's great-grandmother, wondering if they could see us now, if they knew how their story had unfolded. I hoped they would be proud. With a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders and walked towards my car. Tomorrow was another day, another opportunity to make a difference. And I was ready for it, locket around my neck, the past and the future intertwined, propelling me forward into whatever challenges lay ahead. The story of the millionaire and the housemaid didn't end with a shocking revelation. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter of reconciliation, of justice, and of hope. And I was determined to make it a story worth telling. As the years passed, the Sarah Johnson Foundation grew from a fledgling organisation into a powerhouse of change in the business world. Our initiatives expanded, touching lives across the country and even internationally. But with our growing influence came new challenges and unexpected twists in our family saga. 5 years after the Foundation's launch, I found myself standing in front of a mirror in my office, adjusting my suit jacket. I was preparing for what might be the most important presentation of my career, a pitch to a consortium of major corporations to adopt our diversity and inclusion programme on a global scale. As I fastened my grandmother's locket around my neck, a knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. It was James, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Amelia," he said, his voice tight. "We have a situation. A woman has come forward claiming to be another descendant of Sarah. She's demanding a share of the Thompson fortune and a seat on the Foundation's board." My heart raced as I processed this information. We had always known it was possible that Sarah had other descendants, but we'd never been able to trace them. "What proof does she have?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. James handed me a file. "Her name is Gabrielle Martinez. She has old letters, photos, and... Amelia, she has a locket. It looks identical to yours." I sank into my chair, my mind reeling. If this woman was telling the truth, it could change everything. Our carefully constructed narrative of reconciliation and family reunification would need to be rewritten. And more importantly, what would it mean for the Foundation and the work we'd been doing? Despite the turmoil, I knew I couldn't let this derail our presentation. "We'll deal with this later," I told James, standing up with renewed determination. "Right now, we have a room full of CEOs waiting to hear how we're going to change the face of corporate America." The presentation went better than I could have hoped. As I laid out our vision for a more inclusive business world, backed by data from our successful programs, I could see the executives leaning in, their skepticism giving way to interest and even excitement. By the end, we had commitments from 3 major corporations to pilot our program. But even as I shook hands and accepted congratulations, my mind was on Gabrielle Martinez and the potential upheaval she represented. As soon as I could politely excuse myself, I rushed back to my office where Uncle Robert and our legal team were waiting. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of DNA tests, document authentications, and tense negotiations. Gabrielle's claim proved to be legitimate. She was indeed Sarah's great-granddaughter, through a child Sarah had given up for adoption before coming to work for the Thompsons. The revelation sent shockwaves through the family and the media. I'll never forget the day I first met Gabrielle. She was a striking woman in her early 40s, with the same determined set to her jaw that I saw every day in the mirror. As we sat across from each other in a conference room, the tension was palpable. "I don't want to be your enemy, Amelia," Gabrielle said, her voice softer than I had expected. "But I can't ignore my heritage or my right to be part of this legacy. Sarah was my great-grandmother too." I nodded, understanding her position all too well. "I know," I replied. "And I want you to be part of this, Gabrielle. But I need to know, is this about the money, or is it about the work we're doing?" Gabrielle's eyes flashed. "It's about both," she said frankly. "I won't pretend the money isn't important. I have 2 kids to put through college. But more than that, I want to be part of something meaningful. I've been following the Foundation's work, and I think I can contribute." Her honesty was refreshing, and over the next few hours, we talked about our lives, our families, and our hopes for the future. By the end of the meeting, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this unexpected twist could actually strengthen our cause. Integrating Gabrielle into the family and the Foundation wasn't easy. There were legal hurdles, family members who resisted, and a media frenzy that threatened to overshadow our work. But as the dust settled, I found in Gabrielle not just a cousin, but a valuable ally. Her background in environmental law brought a new dimension to our work, allowing us to expand our initiatives into the realm of corporate sustainability and social responsibility. Together, we launched the Green Legacy Programme, partnering with companies to develop eco-friendly practices while also promoting diversity and inclusion. As our family grew, so did our impact. The story of Sarah's lockets, now 3 of them, each carried by a different branch of her descendants, became a powerful symbol of unity and diversity. We used it in our marketing campaigns, showing how different paths could lead to a common goal. But our success also bred resentment and opposition. A group of conservative business leaders formed a coalition against us, arguing that our programs were a form of reverse discrimination. They launched a smear campaign, digging into our family history and trying to discredit our work. One morning, I arrived at the office to find our building plastered with posters. They showed old photos of the Thompson family juxtaposed with images of poverty, with the caption, "Blood Money, the Thompson-Johnson Foundation's dark secret." My heart sank as I realised they had uncovered evidence of the Thompson family's historical involvement in practices that had contributed to racial inequality. For a moment, I felt overwhelmed. How could we continue our work with this shadow hanging over us? But then I remembered something my grandmother used to say. The only way out is through. We couldn't change the past, but we could acknowledge it and use it to fuel our commitment to change. I called an emergency meeting with Uncle Robert, James, Gabriel, and our PR team. "We're not going to hide from this," I told them. "We're going to face it head on." We decided to hold a press conference where we would acknowledge the Thompson family's historical wrongdoings and announce a major new initiative, the Historical Reconciliation Project. This project would involve a thorough investigation of the Thompson family's business practices throughout history, with the goal of identifying communities that had been harmed and developing targeted programs to uplift those communities. The press conference was one of the most difficult moments of my life. Standing in front of a sea of cameras, I laid bare the ugly truths of our family's past. But I also spoke of redemption, of the power of acknowledging past wrongs and working tirelessly to right them. "We cannot change the actions of our ancestors," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "But we can choose how we respond to that legacy. The Thompson-Johnson Foundation is committed to not just acknowledging the past, but to actively working to create a more just and equitable future." The response was mixed. Some praised our transparency and commitment to change, while others accused us of trying to buy our way out of guilt. But in the weeks and months that followed, as we began to implement the Historical Reconciliation Project, we saw a shift in public opinion. Communities that had been sceptical of our motives began to engage with us. We funded educational programs, provided microloans to small businesses, and worked with local leaders to address systemic issues. Slowly but surely, we were making a real difference. A year after the press conference, I found myself back in my old neighbourhood, standing in front of the community centre, where I'd spent so much time as a child. We were there to announce the opening of a new tech training facility, funded by the foundation and staffed in part by employees from Thompson Enterprises. As I looked out at the crowd, a mix of old neighbours, local officials, and eager young people ready to start their training, I felt a sense of things coming full circle. I was no longer the outsider looking in at a world of privilege. I was a bridge between worlds, using the resources and influence I'd gained to open doors for others. After the ceremony, an elderly woman approached me. It took me a moment to recognise her, Mrs. Davis, my old next-door neighbour. She had tears in her eyes as she took my hands in hers. "Amelia," she said, her voice wavering, "your grandmother would be so proud of you. You've taken that stubborn Thompson blood and that Johnson heart, and you're using them to change the world." Her words struck me deeply. Yes, I was a Thompson now, with all the privilege and responsibility that came with the name. But I was also still Amelia Johnson, the girl who had grown up in this neighbourhood, who had cleaned houses to make ends meet. Both parts of my identity were crucial to the work I was doing. As I drove home that evening, my locket feeling warm against my skin, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From a shocked housemaid discovering an unexpected family connection, to the leader of a foundation that was reshaping the business world's approach to equality and justice. It hadn't been an easy road, and I knew there would be more challenges ahead. But as I pulled up to my house, a modest home in a mixed-income neighbourhood, my choice of residence a statement in itself, I felt a sense of peace. I saw Gabrielle's car in the driveway and smiled, knowing she was inside with Uncle Robert and James, probably already deep in discussion about our next project. I touched my locket one last time before getting out of the car. Sarah's legacy lived on, not just in the DNA we carried or the jewellery we wore, but in the work we were doing. We were writing a new chapter in the Thompson Johnson story, one of redemption, reconciliation and hope. As I walked towards the house, I felt ready for whatever came next. The journey that had begun with a millionaire's shock at a housemaid's necklace had transformed into something far greater than any of us could have imagined, and it was far from over. In fact, I had a feeling we were just getting started.